Hello everyone, welcome to yet another Indo-Indians event online. We are really taking advantage of this online sessions where we can connect people from across the world. And today we are very pleased to have with us Dr. Vivek Bammi. Dr. Vivek Bammi is an international educator and has taught the
Wow,
humanities
what are you doing? You're not even trying.
and theory of knowledge in schools in USA, India, and the Philippines.
Wow, what are you doing? You're not even trying.
And Indonesia.
I'm going to make everybody mute now because
Anuj, you're very loud.
I think everybody is very excited to have you online. So, as I was saying, Vivek has been teaching humanities and theory of knowledge in schools in USA, India, the Philippines, Indonesia, and China. As a committed globalist, his sources of joy include travel, classical music, photography, painting, film, theater, cuisine, cricket, tennis, and a good conversation. Wow. In his active engagement with the world, passion and serenity emerge as the yin-yang hallmarks of civilization. Hi Vivek, welcome.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
So Vivek, we miss you here in Indonesia.
Oh my God, I miss Indonesia every day.
I remember many years ago where where we did a book launch for you, where you also had your photographs, and it was such a wonderful event, and it is such a privilege to do this again with you today.
Thank you. I really thank you so much for arranging this. Yeah, that's wonderful.
So, Vivek, tell us about this new book. We are also excited to know more about it.
Absolutely. But before I do, can I first thank you, Poonam, for being always such a wonderful, gracious host. And what you do with Indo-Indians is fantastic. And I always look up to you as a great technologist because I'm just in technology. So you're like a model for me in that sense. And I really would love to say a big hello to all my former colleagues, my friends. It's really wonderful to see you all. And thank you so much for making the time. And even though, as you said, I'm a very committed globalist, but at heart, I still remain mostly Asian. So as Asians, we always begin by looking up to our ancestors, to our elders. So I'd like to say a special thank you to my grandparents and my parents, although they're not with me now. Particularly my grandparents were wonderful people. And I have to make a statement right away, which might offend 50% of the people here, which is that women are somehow much wiser than men. And I got to know that through my two grandmothers, neither of whom went to school, by the way. They were both, in that sense, not educated, but they were extremely wise. And I'll give you two stories from my paternal grandmother. Her husband, that is my paternal grandfather, worked for the Maharaja, or the ruler of Jodhpur state in India. And those days, the men had a very good time. They used to go to these events where there were dancing girls. And, they had a rather nice time as men. And my grandfather thought it was a good idea to take his sons, that is my father and his brother, to the same thing. And my grandmother apparently picked up a gun and said, "You can do whatever you want, but if you take my sons, I'm going to kill you." And the second thing she did is she insisted that my father and his brother went to a good school, which in India at that time was the Doon School. It was just opening up as a school for which combined the best of Western education with very strong Indian traditions. So she insisted that both her sons should go there, whereas my grandfather was quite happy to send them to a village school. So if it wasn't for my grandmother, I don't know where I would have ended up. Definitely not the kind of platform that I had.
Yeah. How a single decision can change lives forever.
Absolutely. We are so dependent on other people's decisions. It's amazing. Yeah. And my maternal grandfather was a historian, and he worked for the what was then the British Administrative Service and then became the Indian Administrative Service. And he greatly influenced my love of history. So I always look up to them. And of course, my parents, I have to look up to them always, because they gave me the greatest gift that any parent can give a child, which is independent thinking. They encouraged that right from the beginning. And at age 6, they gave me a gift of the Reader's Digest World Atlas, which was a very unusual toy to give a 6-year-old.
So you've been traveling since you were 6.
Exactly. That set me on the path. Yeah. Okay, so that out of the way now. Now getting to the book. These ideas for the book have really been, swirling around in my mind for quite a while, because I've been teaching for over 30 years. But they took on much greater urgency, of course, because we now face this huge peril, this double peril of pandemics. I'm putting it in plural because most people are predicting that we're going to have more than one. And then climate change and the climate catastrophe. So we are at a very critical juncture in human history. And in fact, I think human history has come full circle. If you look at our beginnings as a human species, as Homo sapiens, we faced two huge dangers to our existence. That was nature and animals. They were stronger than us. We had to really struggle to overcome them. And in the process of doing that, we've turned the tables on them completely. The amounts of cruelty and destruction that we have unleashed upon both nature and animals is just unbelievable. And now it's come back to really bite us very badly. So again, we are at this very important inflection point, I think, at a point of, I think really survival more than anything else.
Yeah, it's the tipping point, and we might just topple over.
Exactly. And so as an educator, of course, and many of you on this panel are educators, it's a great responsibility on us to do something about it. While I was very lucky to both study and teach at some of the best schools in both in India and overseas, I always felt there was something missing, even in the best schools. And of course, part of it is to do with the fact that schools still tend to be very geared towards employability, towards external standards, a very competitive model of education. Even very good schools like Jakarta International, where I taught for 25 years, which was outstanding in many ways, but was still constrained by some of those things. And so trying to put my finger on it, I said, what is missing? And what I felt was missing was that I don't think schools, even the best schools in the world, give their students what we need, which is a total expansion of the mind. Right? I think we stop somewhere and we don't expand the mind enough.
Yeah, in fact, Vivek, I was very curious with what you shared with me earlier, and even the cover of the book. And then, I've heard about IQ, which is what schools look at, your IQ. Then slowly it moved to EQ. And then now people are also looking at spiritual quotient, that how spiritual are you, how much do you meditate, and how in touch you are with yourself, your mindfulness, etc. But, I was very surprised and curious to see your book cover. And I don't know if everybody on this panel knows what your book cover is all about. Maybe I should leave it to you.
Well, yeah, I'll show you the book cover in a moment. But let me explain that what I meant is that I think what we need to do is to extend the mind of the student, of the child, even more, and to keep doing that throughout life. So in fact, what you teach in school becomes a blueprint for lifelong learning. That's what I would like. And that's why I call it JQ. You're right. I mean, I think IQ has its purpose. It certainly predicts success in certain areas like academic areas. I think EQ was a very useful addition because it reminded us that the emotional quotient, which you can't measure, of course, but which you can become aware of, is very important for success in life. To be emotionally stable and to be emotionally aware is a very big step forward. But what we see, the reality today is so many people are emotionally in real trouble. Yes. We have mental anxiety, depression, all kinds of things happening on a big scale. I was startled. The World Health Organization, even before COVID, predicted that by 2030, more people in the world will be suffering from depression than from heart disease or cancer. I mean, that is just staggering. So I don't think either IQ or EQ are enough. That's why we need JQ, which is like the joy quotient. Now that's something I need to explain because that is the central part of the book, right?
Yeah.
So I don't want joy to come across as this very nefarious sort of feel-good thing, right? Which it might look like. I think joy is a feeling of both physical and mental wellness, right? But it's not something permanent. It's not something that you'll feel every moment of your life.
Yeah.
It's a very dynamic concept. It needs to be nurtured continuously. But the great thing about it is that it coheres with, it agrees with the most fundamental and the most basic thing which makes us human, which is our brain, right? What separates us from other species is our incredible brain. And this is where I think it's so exciting that neuroscience, or study of the brain, brings us all that we need to know now about the brain itself, or rather we're still finding out a lot more. But what we are finding about the brain is that it's extremely dynamic, it is extremely flexible, and it's extremely live wired, right?
Yeah, in fact, Vivek, I had to stop you here, and I would like, a little bit more about, you mentioned joy quotient, and joy not being a permanent state of mind, but something that comes and goes, being dynamic based on how you live.
Right.
So, for you, Vivek, how would you define joy, and how is it different from happiness?
I'm very glad you asked that because, happiness is, again, I mean, happiness again cannot be a state, right? It's something which, again, you experience from time to time, right? But I think joy is more fundamental, more long-lasting once it becomes part of you. And I think joy is more like a quest. Happiness is something that happens from time to time. You will have many happy moments, right? And most cultures also build that into their calendars. You have certain moments of great happiness when people celebrate coming together, whether it's in religious festivals or today in sports or in a rock concert, whatever it is, people feel happiness at different moments. But I think joy is more like a quest, as I said, a journey in which you embark and which, it's not so important what the ultimate destination is, but rather the process itself is very important.
Right.
So I think that's what, and by calling it a quotient, I don't by any means mean to indicate that it's can be measured in any way, right? In fact, the great thing about this quotient is that it's infinite. It cannot be measured because it's so, as I said, it's like the brain, right? The brain is made up of 86 billion neurons, which are firing together and have 10,000 connections each. Just think of that,
Yeah.
So what's going on inside that little cranium of ours is unbelievable.
So you have all those 86 million spark plugs.
86 billion.
Billion spark plugs. You're waiting for them to fire.
Right. And what I think schools, education, parents, all the people who teach us things, what they do is not to engage with a lot of that, right? They leave us somewhat, short.
So Vivek, how do you find joy?
Yeah, so that's what I said. This is something we have to cultivate. This is something like a quest, as I said. And so in the book, what I found most useful was a concept that I got from Indian culture called the chakras. I think a lot of people might be aware of that. Chakras are like circles of energy, right, in the body itself. And there are hundreds of them, but there are 7 main circles which are identified. And so I find this a very important concept, right? I found it very important for structuring my book, because I found that if you're able to tap into these circles of energy, as we call them, then each circle develops a certain sense of joy in it.
Right.
And so my book has 8 circles of joy.
Wow, that's quite an amazing correlation of joy and the 8 chakras. When did this strike you, and was it the pandemic, all that enforced insight or introspection that led you to this?
I would say that had a major impact, certainly. But as I said, I think these ideas were floating in my head long before. And my colleague, Jen Olmsted, who's here today, I've already discussed this with her much before the pandemic. So
right.
I have a special thanks to her for being my sounding board. And
in
my
fact,
colleague,
we will probably call on Jennifer later to share her thoughts on this too.
And my wonderful colleague, Bruce Sherratt, who's a wonderful artist sitting in Bali. And he and I have had so many wonderful conversations on these things. And Joel, who claims he's very old now, but we've had great conversations as well. So, other people become sort of sounding boards. But the idea of using these 8 circles, I think that was also to emphasize that in our education somewhere, we lose touch with wisdom traditions, as I call them.
Right.
So it's very good to go back to them and to see what they actually mean.
Yeah.
And when I looked at this idea of the chakras or cycles of energy, I said, this is really a very powerful idea, which we should resurrect in our times, but of course do it in such a way that it suits our own purposes, of course.
Yeah.
And the great thing for me today is that neuroscience, that is the cutting edge science of our times in biology, has come together with wisdom traditions. Just to give you one example, right? Yeah. From the first circle is like the unfolding of energy, right? It's what we call the Kundalini, the unfolding of energy. What neuroscience has found, a neuroscientist from Stanford says that it's very good to give yourself 2 to 10 minutes of bright sunlight in the morning. That sets your entire organism on a very positive note, right? Right. Well, guess what? In India, we have the Surya Namaskar, right? We have the sun salutation. So we actually have a 10-minute exercise first thing in the morning to salute the sun. So that means modern neuroscience is just reinforcing what we already knew from our wisdom in the past, but we had forgotten all about it, or we didn't apply it that much.
Well, that's why it's called research.
Right. So can I just share the cover now?
Please go ahead.
Yeah. You all see that?
Yes, and that's a little Balinese boy.
Absolutely, yes. So to me, that image captures joy in all its beauty. Just look at. I saw him at a ceremony for tooth filing in Bali, which is a religious ceremony there, and he just came up and he performed, spontaneous, creative, and just the look of complete joy on his face. I mean, that to me captures, what it's all about. And as I said, my book or my ideas are a hint for lifelong learning. So the spontaneity and creativity that we have in childhood, we somehow lose, especially through school again, right? And this is something we must preserve right through our lives. And that's why I really look up to artists like my friend Bruce, who has kept his artistic fire running, going all this time. And I think that's very important. And so to me, this image sort of captured the idea of joy altogether. Do you want me to just quickly go through the structure of the book? So I can give you a slight hint of what is in each of these 8 circles, so you get an idea of how it progresses.
I would love to have more info on the book, but I think there's so many of your friends here, and I would like to open it up to them and ask them if they have any questions.
Sure, anytime.
Uh,
Sure, anytime.
Instead of me asking all the questions, it would be great if all your friends can possibly raise a hand and ask a question of you and of your book. Jennifer, would you like to go first?
Uh, it's so wonderful to see you, Vivek. And I remember
Okay, we're having some technical issues.
and how excited. Oh, are you able to hear me?
Yes, now we are. Yeah.
Yes, brilliant. Yeah, I remember Vivek talking to you at the Satulagi, and you introduced me to this wonderful idea about the J quotient. And it really struck me about the responsibility we have as educators. Our responsibility goes beyond teaching maths and science and economics, and we are in fact shaping young lives who are the future of our world.
Mhm.
And how do you see the J quotient as forming educators in that role?
Sorry, we lost the last bit of it. Ask the last bit again.
So how do you see your book, The J Quotient, as a way to guide educators in that
great.
role?
Very, very good question. So what I've done in the book is to include what I call learning activities. So the learning activities for each chapter, for each of the 8 circles. Basically the idea is, as I said, that we need to move towards a new model, what we might call a planet-based or world-based education system. So from the very beginning, we have to inculcate this absolute love and responsibility for other species, other forms of being around us, right? And of course, also for other people, because the other big problem we've created for ourselves is this massive inequality. And that really is unsustainable in the long run. So I think the more we make kids aware of other people, other species, other things around them, but also give them responsibility. It could begin with something so simple as adopt a plant, adopt an animal, or just watch how a plant grows in your school or whatever. So I think that it has to start with something as basic as that. And when you start writing stories, right, make natural forces your characters. I would love to have written a story about Sandy, right? The big storm that hit New York. I'd like to be Sandy.
That's your next book, Vivek.
I'd like to be Sandy. And actually, somebody who's already doing that is my former colleague. He was with me in school and college, and he's a brilliant novelist, Amitav Ghosh.
Yes.
He's already writing books in which that natural forces begin to emerge as characters in their own right. So, going back to Jen's question, this is how a child would begin to identify with nature and say, okay, I'm not just some anonymous thing out there, but I'm actually that force. And how does it play a role in my life or in other people's lives? Because the horrible thing we are seeing today is the impact of climate change is being felt most by poorest countries.
Right.
Right. Bangladesh, India, a lot of countries in Africa, they're already feeling the impact, and a lot of people are being displaced as we speak.
Yeah. So I'd like to open it up to another question, if any, from the audience.
But before we go, Jen, does that answer your question?
The workers will know that they have not tell the other teachers. Because panic.
It would have been careful, no?
That's why.
Hello, Vedant, are you asking a question? Okay, I don't think they were asking a question. Okay, let me put everybody on a gallery view so we can see people. And if anybody has a question, if they can just raise a hand, please.
Uday does. Uday Singh has a question.
Yes, Uday, Joel, Bruce, everybody has a question.
Oh my God.
I think I'll go first.
You opened the
I'll go
floodgates.
Yes, Uday, please go ahead.
So, Vivek just turned out to be a relative. We went to the same school many, many years ago, and he was actually teaching me. So then later we became relatives. And I'm very intrigued that he has chosen this sort of a path to make sure that, kids are one with nature. But, being a lawyer with profession and as a professional, I've seen that all our systems have collapsed. These things like democracy, our institutions have just completely failed. And, at the beginning of the talk, Vivek was, bringing our attention to the fact that you're in the middle of these pandemics, which may have catastrophic consequences. You're talking about natural forces, something like a meteor hit, which took out all the dinosaurs, yeah? So I'm just thinking, how do you ease people's mental conditions? That's my only question. Because I've seen adolescents really struggle, really struggle, just not being able to understand what sort of world are we inheriting? How can we, instead of starting a kid off at the age of 5 or 6 on the chakra method or the joy quotient, can we sort of bring it in for the kids who are about, say, 16 or 17?
Absolutely. And you raised a very important question because, we are finding this mental problem.
Sorry, Vivek, sorry. Just one more thing. Forget about the kids. What about people like us, who are 50? We're chronically unhappy. So.
Absolutely. As I said, the WHO has already warned us that depression is going to be the #1 problem in the world, health-wise, by 2030. I now think they were saying that before the pandemic. I think it's going to happen earlier. It's probably already happening. So we're finding this mental ill-being, we might call it, the opposite of well-being, at all ages, right? Teenagers, young adults, older adults, as you said, and people who are older. So, we are living much longer. We have longer lifespans, but we're not living better. People are quite miserable at many, as you said, at many stages of their lives. So, as I said, how do we get out of this is to, instead of looking at lifespan, look at brain span. Okay. The brain itself gives you lots of clues. The brain is telling you that I am changeable. You can change. You don't have to be depressed forever. If Instagram or Facebook is causing you problems, as we all know they are, there has to be a way out of that. And therefore it has to
close those accounts and move on. It's one of the
it has to be a partnership between parents, teachers, children, as always has been, right? It has to be a social, a new social contract, actually, in a way, is very necessary. Or as Arundhati Roy calls it, we have to create a new world. The great thing, as I said, is that, and if you look at the Chinese character for crisis, it says both danger and opportunity. The danger is pretty obvious, as you're saying, but so is the opportunity. Our brain is capable of rescuing itself. It's done so millions of times in our history, as I said. We are again at a very dangerous point in our history, but we can do it again. And we can do it by tapping into this very thing that we have, the wonderful, expandable, dynamic brain that we have. And we can change it at any age. People at 70 and 80, their brains are being changed once they become aware that they're doing something wrong. It begins with something, the third circle is really important. The third circle is at the navel, right? The gut, you might call it. And now we become aware that the gut has more cells and things than any other part of the body, the biome, as we call it. And so there are things like nutrition and exercise become so important. And both of those we're getting wrong, right? We are in an extremely inactive stage for many young people. They're just being completely like couch potatoes. And secondly, we're giving them all the wrong foods. Those two combined cause depression. And secondly, they cause brain damage. But it's very easily reversible. So there are many steps we can take, and some of them begin with the sort of things I was talking about, which is making people, young kids, aware of their responsibility to the planet and things. But it's also, smaller things like this: change your nutrition, change your exercise habits, and very importantly, of course, social relationships. Right, those remain extremely crucial. The quality of social relationships remain very crucial. And this is something I felt that we were not taught in school at all, what I would call relational intelligence.
Oh, not at all.
Especially, as you know, Uday, we both went to a boys-only school. Did we know anything
crazy
about girls?
times. Yeah.
We knew nothing about girls at all.
Nothing, zero.
And then
Zero.
at 25, you're married off to a woman. You don't know anything about them.
Married off to a woman. All right. Vivek.
But
Hmm?
Vivek, you all used to have socials with Vellum girls, so you can't say you didn't know anything about girls.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But with those socials, the teachers
Once
were
a
hovering
year.
around to make sure you never got more than one foot or more apart. Don't go near.
Hey, Vivek, I just wanted to ask, I mean, I'm sitting in Melbourne, and apparently we have the distinction of being the city which has had which been most locked down, like hard lockdowns, right?
Right.
I just wanted to know whether other people have felt the sense of getting sort of spiraling further and further, because I see this with a lot of my friends, and I felt it myself, that just being unable to sort of just get on with one's lives and go out and see people. I mean, it's not even that you're socializing, just being able to see people on the street and things open has become a sort of a low level, I would call it, depression. It's not something that I would call depression, other than the fact that it's a sort of a low level miasma which affects everyone. And we sort of almost like passing it on to each other. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but again, what is great about the lockdown, I hate to say it, but what is great about the lockdown, on the other hand, is that through things like YouTube and all, I'm now able to access, people and things which I've always wanted to do, right? Listen to great music. I have all the time now to do that. So as I said, this is the part of the brain which the brain craves that sort of thing, right? As long as you're willing to feed it, the brain craves that. So I've been able to explore other kinds of music, which I wouldn't otherwise have done. Of course, I'm still very fond of Western classical, so I tend to go back to composers I haven't heard before and things. But I also love, gamelan. I love, Indian classical music. But it's also given me access to other things which I may not have had the time for earlier. So I think one has to change one's idea that somehow what we might call a sense of well-being, mental well-being, always has to come from other people.
I think that's very true.
There's a deep resource within each of us.
Yeah.
Right? But at the same time, I agree with you entirely, Kavita, that ultimately social bonds are extremely important, right? I mean, you can't downplay those. I mean, those are really important. Those are going to be important throughout your life. But the brain is adaptable. We are in a period here which might last for a year, might last for 2 years, in which that kind of active social interaction may not be possible. But we can find other ways to do that, right? Just as we're doing now, right, Poonam?
Yeah, absolutely. Across borders.
Yeah.
And we have
I don't know what it is about me and my sister who I see there many we are both absolute optimists, so must be something to do with our parents.
Yeah, incurable optimism. Eternal, yes.
Vivek, we have Muhammad Ali who's been raising his hand for some time now. Muhammad, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
I do agree with what Mrs. Kavita just mentioned right now.
Yes.
That mental well-being, if it is in a negative stage, is highly contagious. And this tends to affect the surrounding and sucks up energy rather than generate positivity. And this is what Mr. Uday Singh was also talking about.
Yes.
And I really liked what, sir, you mentioned about navel being the second brain. And I have experienced this through the continuous practice of Kapal Bhati.
Yes.
How this brings about that, activates that chakra,
Yes.
and it helps you to come out of that vicious cycle of, negativity, and you tend to forget a lot of things.
Yes.
And what I want to bring up over here is, there are like systemic problems, and until and unless there is a deep level government intervention here in the realm of policy making, it's not going to take not going to have a practical impact on the entire citizenship. I think all people taken collectively. Countries have moved ahead, and they have changed their focus from GDP to happiness quotients. And even a small country like Costa Rica today ranks 16th in the world on the happiness index, above US. US is 17th, and because it tends to basically put a lot of its budget, probably 8% or more, only on education and that industry. So that is why they have been able to achieve this kind of a massive success. And places like New Zealand has got a well-being budget. In fact, Denmark has got a happiness research institute, and we are very well aware of what's going on in Bhutan. So those are changes in the policy-making realm, which can have a deep impact on the lives of everybody together. Otherwise, and I don't always think that it's a matter of choice, as we dismiss, but it largely depends on various insurmountable circumstances, which cannot be ignored.
Thanks very much. I agree with you, Mr. Ali, but I always go back to one of my absolute all-time heroes, which is the Buddha himself. And, what he began with was saying, confront the problem. Begin with, and his first statement is so startling. He says, all humans go through suffering, period. Including he himself. I mean, he could have spent the rest of his life like a king, become absolutely spoiled, rotten, had all the luxuries in the world, and then died and nobody would have known about him, right? But he confronted the issues head on. And just as Kavita was telling us, and you are telling us, you got to confront this issue head on. Yes, there are lots of people in the world today who are suffering from mental issues, right? They're suffering from anxiety, from depression. In fact, when I offer workshops in schools in India, for example, the teachers tell me, oh, our students are suffering from stress and depression. I'm like, what? We never even heard of these words when we went to school. Maybe we didn't have the vocabulary. Maybe we were all stressed and depressed, but I don't remember that. I don't think we were, So there are certain things happening in our society, social media being one of them, of course. And as I said, the very competitive model that we've adopted, which tends to make people go in that direction. Plus, as I said, lifestyle factors like lack of exercise, as well as food choices. All these are impacting these things, right? But we have the solutions. It's not that we don't have the solutions. Once you know the problem, once you know what the issue is, you can easily go around to deal with it. And I said, beginning with some very basic things like good nutrition and good exercise and good, physical wellness, because physical wellness and mental wellness often go together. That's the whole basis of yoga or qigong or tai chi or any of the old practices that we have. Right? But very key in this, the Buddhist perspective also, and also something I'm sure you've all heard of as educators is the growth mindset. In all of these, the key factor is that it's developmental. All right, it's not going to happen overnight. Developmental means that it has to be nurtured, it has to be done over time. So let's begin to see emotion as a skill as well. That's what the Buddha did, right? The Buddha saw emotion as a skill, something that you can develop over time, something that you can work on. And that, I think, is a very powerful thing. I'll never forget, I was studying in the UK, in London for 1 year, doing my master's there when I was in a sabbatical from JIS. And one day, suddenly these guys walked into our college and there were these Burmese monks. And so we were all very intrigued. What are these Burmese monks doing in London, And they were very modern because they were carrying video cameras and things. So anyway, we got chatted to them and we said, what are you doing here? They said, oh, we are here, and said, why are you here? Oh, we're very needed here. And we said, why? He said, because all the people here are so unhappy. And that's when I realized that, the British, and the British now have a minister for loneliness. The British have become very aware that they have these social problems. But the good thing about it is they're willing to do something about it and even get help from outside. Of course, the Burmese monks could now do something about their own government. But, at that point, I'd never even thought about that you could get a group of people who would come in and be able to talk to a culture which is so different from their own, but be able to talk to them about something so basic as happiness or, mental balance and things like that. Yeah. So again, I think, the great thing about the brain is that it's malleable, it's changeable. And at the same time, I want to go back to one other very important influence on this book is the French historian Fernand Braudel, right? He said that there are 3 cycles of time. And the brain is so powerful that it can live in these 3 cycles simultaneously. The first cycle is the geographical or geological cycle, right? That is, which has been there for millennia. It changes very slowly, except when you have a catastrophe, like when you have an earthquake or you have a tsunami, you suddenly become aware, oh yeah, there's nature out there which can destroy us, right? But those are geographical cycles. We can learn so much from them. That is nature, right? The second cycle is historical or civilizational. I think that's where we've gone wrong. We simply don't delve enough into our own past, into our civilizations and the great strength that they gave us, right? The great insights we can learn. Why don't we learn, for example, from Australian Aborigines? They're the perfect ecologists. Or the Adivasis of India, they're the perfect ecologists. Yeah. They teach us about how to live in harmony with nature. We just don't learn from those people because we're too arrogant about it. And similarly, from our own civilizations, they have such strengths, such great ideas, and we can easily go to them. And so one of them is Buddhism, I think, or Buddhist practice, which a lot of people, including in the Western societies now, are adopting or at least beginning to see as a good path. I'm not saying it's good for everybody, but what I'm saying is that it has a certain approach which I like, which is that it confronts the problem straight on, right? It doesn't try to beat around the bush. It says, okay, let's tackle it. If there's unhappiness, we can tackle it. Yeah. And we can tackle it in a skillful way by being developmental about it and by reintroducing, I think, some of the important elements of emotional well-being.
Yeah, the joy quotient. Yes,
yeah,
Vivek.
Exactly. Yeah.
So Vivek, I would like to first commend you on, the power of one, where as a single person, you've gone ahead and put your thoughts on paper such that it is available to everybody and everybody who reads it can benefit from this joy quotient and think of it as a concept that they can each adopt and expand upon. And I heard the questions that came and they were all about, the the ill feeling or the mental ill feeling that they had. And I think joy quotient is maybe the proper antidote to all this. So I think it's great that you have come up with this book at this moment in time. So when is it out? When is it available for all of us to read?
Great question. It's being published by a company in the UK called Publishing Push. And they told me that the book is now ready. So it should be hitting Amazon. When we say it hits the stands these days, it means it hits Amazon.
Okay. So in fact, let me know when it is available. So maybe to all the people on this panel, I can send them an email and tell them that it's available, and I can also share the download link with them.
Hopefully within a week. Hopefully within a week or so.
Yeah. So I would like to. We are running out of time now, Vivek, and I'd like to thank you, and I'd like to thank everybody else on this wonderful audience, the wonderful audience, for sharing their questions. In fact, I missed out on Mini Naidu, who also wanted to ask a question.
That's okay. That's okay. I miss this. I can ask him anytime.
Okay. And we hope to have Vivek again and answer some more questions as well as share his thoughts. And I wish, may the joy be with all of you. And I look forward to reading your book as well, Vivek, very soon.
Thank you so much, Poonam. I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you everybody for joining. If you have any questions or comments, you have my email ID. Just send me an email at event@indoindians.com, and I look forward to interacting with you.
And Poonam, you did say that YouTube of this will be available, right? YouTube recording.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And watch out for Vivek's book, which will be on Amazon real soon. It's called The Joy Quotient. Learning from after the pandemic.
Yeah, life and learning after COVID, yes.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Vivek. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks
Thank you very much.